So, I've gone back to my usual source of Zen wisdom, which is the New York Times. And on Monday, they had an op-ed piece, you may have seen it, called "The Case for Teaching Ignorance." And of course, that scandalized some people. One person said he'd rather resign than support a class on ignorance. But it's really important because, as the author says, he was horrified by the impression that sometimes people think, whether students or everybody, think they know more about anything than they do, whether it's God or a grain of sand in science or theology, which is totally true. There's so much more that we don't know than we do. And we should be willing to face that. He makes a number of points here. He says, focusing on uncertainty can foster curiosity, latent curiosity, very energizing in any field, including meditation, while emphasizing clarity can convey a warped understanding of knowledge. Because it's not necessarily true at all, especially in meditation, but anywhere, that clearer knowledge is better. That's warped. We do have, as Bernard Herring, moral theology professor, said once, surveying the moral theology of, it could be in many fields, but of the Western world in the second millennium, he said we have a classical Western group neurosis for certainty. The West is neurotic as regards certainty. We want to be certain. We want to have certainty about our lives. We want to have certainty about science. We want to have certainty about faith. Whereas, just for example, faith itself has gone from being not knowing, which is what it really is, accepting the mystery which is beyond us, and plunging into that mystery, making a, quote, leap of faith into the unknowing, and unknowable, ultimately, to being certain. We have certain knowledge. Faith is the most certain type of knowledge. Well, on one level, yes, but another level, absolutely not. And any knowledge has to be tentative and open, especially in science. You have hypotheses and you move forward. And, general relativity might seem to account for everything, but it's just a theory that we have now, and who knows where it's going to go. So we have to have this kind of openness and this comfort with the unknown, with the ambiguous, with the uncertain, with the unsettled, with the unresolved, including in our own personal lives. Being willing to go with the flow and not know who we are, where we're going, much less who God is, or even what a bird's wing is, or anything like that. So, as one author put it, Dr. Feinstein, we are really feeling around in dark rooms, bumping into unidentifiable things, just think of your own heart, right? Looking for barely perceptible phantoms sometimes. So he says, people tend to think of not knowing as something to be wiped out or overcome, as if ignorance were simply the absence of knowledge. But answers don't really resolve questions, they provoke new ones. There's a famous phrase in Western philosophy and theology called docta ignorantia, which means learned ignorance. Docta ignorantia, where that's a very positive view of ignorance. The more well-informed you are, the more taught you are, the more wise you are, the wiser you are with the more taught you are, docta, the docta part, the more you're comfortable with the ignorance part, with the not knowing. If you're really instructed, you know that there's some things you can't be instructed about in any kind of clear terms. And of course, we'll see that in Zen in just a second. That's very obvious. So there's this uncertainty, he says, to this, and this intensifies our emotions. Confusion and frustration, which is why the ego doesn't like this, but also exhilaration and surprise, openness to discovery. Again, Richard Rohr makes a big deal about this need for the ego, this false lesser self, to have certainty, to be in control, to manage, to understand, to feel secure. And that's part of the neurosis. Whether in the level of thought or the level of emotion, as we just saw, or throughout our lives. We have to learn to let go of that selfish need, to be certain. So at the very end he says, so the time has come to view ignorance as regular rather than deviant. You have to really be comfortable. To achieve psychological and spiritual maturity, you have to be comfortable with mystery, comfortable with it, with not knowing, comfortable with the unresolved. Our students will be more curious and more intelligent if, in addition to facts, they were equipped with theories of ignorance as well as theories of knowledge. So epistemology should be, I think there's a word here he coins, agnotology, I think he said, the science of not knowing. That would be very useful. Now, obviously, and this fits Zen perfectly. We'll come to Christianity in a moment, but even the koan itself is a way of reminding us to get to reality. You have to go by a way you can't understand, which is almost a direct quote of John of the Cross, by the way. To get to where you don't know, you have to go by a way that you don't know, etc. So the koan itself is a proof of this. It confounds our desire to clearly understand or grasp something, but as a way to remind us that reality itself cannot be grasped or understood on any level. Even a grain of sand, as I say, or a bird's wing. My other source of Zen wisdom, the Page-a-Day Calendar, had a quote from Jack Kerouac, of all Zen masters, a few days ago, saying, wow, if you really understand a rock or wind or a bird or wood, you see reality is spiritual. Which does not mean, as we tend to think in the West platonically, spiritual is immaterial. No, all that spiritual really means is profoundly mysterious and interconnected. You're spiritual if you go in deep into the mystery of things and see how it's interconnected. It has nothing to do with matter or spirit in that platonic sense. So, one of the good, this fits very well with the notion, the central thesis, as many of you know, of the Heart Sutra is emptiness is form and form is emptiness. So right in form, right in a grain of sand or a bird's wing, right here in post-material reality, you have emptiness. You have vast mystery and interconnectedness, which is what our Zen meditation, any meditation, tries to get us to experience. It's this doorway into the infinite, literally, the unknowable infinite, way beyond our grasp, what can be grasped. So it's right there. It's right there. You don't have to go off somewhere. It's right here. Emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. Or to express it in terms of light and dark knowledge, not in that imagery, which we have right here in the paper, where you have a guy shining a flashlight in the dark. In Zen, most often it's the dark circle, which represents the unknowable, the absolute, because it's unknowable, beyond graspability, and the white circle, the full circle, like the full moon, which represents the relative, because it's more perceptible. This imagery is very clear in one of the famous lines from the Sandokai, the identity of relative and absolute, which is just the same idea. Emptiness is form, form is emptiness, absolute is relative, relative is absolute. They're right here in the same moment, the same thing. The line that comes to mind here, because of the imagery of light and dark, listen to this, and Bernie Glassman quotes this and comments on it briefly in his book, The Infinite Circle. Within light, there is darkness, but do not try to understand the darkness. Within darkness, there is light, but do not look for that light. At least that's one translation, and I think it's a good one, because I think the point is, within darkness, there is light. The darkness that is the absolute, the darkness which is everything, is extremely luminous, but it's darkness to our eyes, as even Aristotle said. So it's darkness to us. That's why it says, don't look for that light. Within darkness there is light, but don't look for it as light, because you'll misunderstand it. You're looking for light where it's not that kind of light. It's the light that's darkness. Darkness is light. It's not the usual way. So that's why it says, be careful. Oh, there's light here. Well, don't look for it as light or you'll miss it. Similarly, within darkness there is light, do not look for that light. Within light there is darkness, but do not try to understand that darkness. So within light, within ordinary things, the bird's wing or the grain of sand, there is a dark mystery, but don't look for it, do not look within darkness. Within light there is darkness, but do not try to understand that darkness, because then you'll imagine darkness. In other words, these phenomena have to go beyond our usual grasp of light and dark, and have to reveal themselves in the actual experience. And they're one in the experience. There's actually a wonderful line, a wonderful couple of phrases in Psalm 139, which we just had in our liturgy this week, by the way, in the Catholic liturgy, which say the same thing. It says, dark is not dark to you, speaking to God. Dark is not dark to you. The night shines is as light as the day. It's exactly the same thing, really. It's just expressed in the Seneca. Light and dark and light. For you. And then it has one little phrase, which is almost untranslatable. And it says, Kachasheka kaora. 2 words in Hebrew which simply mean, as the darkness, so the light. As darkness, as light. So darkness, so light. So darkness, so light. And what does that mean? Well, if they're one, emptiness is form and form is empty. And the experience there. Now, if you're scratching your heads and wriggling around trying to figure this out, great! Because you can't. All right? It's on a level beyond graspability. It has to be experienced, which is what we're trying to do in our Zen meditation. And of course, if you apply the unknowability to the absolute itself, well, then it's even clearer, right? Even in Western theology, the dark night, the soul, or the ray of darkness, which is the divine, that the absolute cannot be grasped. A good koan that I think the most suitable koan for this is Psalm 20 is koan 28. A well-known Ryutan commented on it before, but it bears repetition. Tokusan was a famous Zen master who, in the early days, was reading and commenting on the Diamond Sutra. He's really grasping. You're in trouble. Grasping the truth of the Diamond Sutra. And he got into a little debate once with a woman and got utterly bested by her. It happens a number of times in the koans. It's supposed to be the ultimate shame of being bested by a woman. The sexism of the times is funny. Well, not so funny. The point being that he wasn't getting it. A woman reminded him, a very wise woman, that he wasn't really getting it. So he said, "Can you direct me to a Zen teacher around here?" And so she directed him to Ryutan. And they spoke through the night, and they spoke through the night again, and finally Ryutan said, "It's getting late. You'd better leave." So Tokusan said goodbye, lifted up the door curtain, and went out. And noticing that it was dark, it's like in St. John's Gospel when Judas goes out and John says it was dark, it was night. Deeper meaning. So he was noticing it was dark. He turned back and said, "It's dark outside." So Ryutan thereupon lit a candle and handed it to him. And Tokusan was about to take it when Ryutan blew it out. At this, Tokusan was enlightened. So he was enlightened by the darkness. Just as he was about to go into the dark and he had the light which he thought he needed, it got blown out, and he was in the dark, and it was light. So the dark, so the light. He got it. Well, being an enthusiastic person, a passionate person, the next day he brought all his notes and commentaries on the Diamond Sutra and put them in a big pile and took a torch and said, "Okay," he said, "even though one masters various profound philosophies, it is like placing a single strand of hair in the great sky. Even if one gains all the essential knowledge in the world, it is like throwing a drop of water into a deep ravine." Exactly. There's no comparison between the knowable and the unknowable. So he burned them all. And he left with gratitude, the last line says. He left with gratitude. Now, Shibayama in his commentary says, well, you don't really have to burn all the scriptures. But just don't be deluded into thinking you've got all the answers right there. And you can say the same thing about the Christian scriptures. or obviously a fortiori about theological books. They're useful, but don't be led to think they have the truth, the full truth right there. St. Thomas said, whatever we say about God, you have to immediately deny it. God is good, but, well, not good the way we think. There's light in the dark, but don't look for the light, as light. He said, or Augustine says, if you've understood it, it's not God. Whatever we think we know, there's more that we don't know. Another thing St. Thomas said about God. And of course, the most famous of all is he did the same thing, almost the same thing that Tokusan did. At the end of his career, he had an experience. He was enlightened, shall we say, and said, everything I've written is just straw. And this is arguably the greatest theologian of all time in the Christian tradition. So, as Shibiyama noted, Thomas did not burn up the Summa Theologica, but he didn't write anymore. He couldn't. So this is what happens often when you finally do get it. You can't grasp it by graspable things. Okay, and one more dimension to this. This psalm that we had this week in the liturgy was paired with, very fortuitously and auspiciously, with Matthew 23, Jesus' famous diatribe against the scribes and the Pharisees, the hypocrites. This is another very serious and important dimension of being comfortable with the dark, comfortable with paradox, comfortable with mystery, comfortable with what cannot be resolved, and that's comfortable with your shadow. That darkness inside. Notice the Jungian term shadow, precisely. That's in the dark. So until we can learn to see the light in that dark, realizing the darkness already in our light, but the light in our darkness, until we can realize to be comfortable with it, forgive it, embrace it, integrate it, harmonize it, realize it's you, realize it is the Buddha, it is Christ. If we don't make friends with it that way, it's just making friends with reality, with ourselves, our true selves, when integrated. Then what do we turn into but scribes and Pharisees? Hypocrites. Hypocrites most of the time. Delusional, people in denial, and people who project all the dark onto everybody else out there. You don't have to look very far, maybe even in your own experience, you don't have to look very far around you in our world, with various religions, fanatics, fundamentalists, presidential candidates who have not embraced their shadow and are busy projecting it out on everybody else. That is hugely dangerous. They're intolerant because they're intolerant. Because they're projecting evil onto everybody else in lieu of facing it in themselves and embracing it and forgiving it and integrating it. So whenever you find people, including maybe yourselves at certain points in your lives, looking out and seeing only the evil, being practically paranoid and looking around, well, it's just you when you're projecting out there. Whereas when you wake up to the interconnectedness beauty of everything, then what you see out there are angels and Buddhas and Christs, as well as in here, which is what's really out there. Including and embracing everything else, metabolizing everything else. So, my dearest wish for you is you can be as ignorant as possible and embrace the dark. Which is the only ultimate way to the light. We have a few minutes if you need.